Anyway, we have to really convince Courtney in a sweet way that it's making a mistake if she doesn't give Colt another chance.
Give him one last
chance.
chance.
One last. So first of all, Colt wants to apologize. And he knows he made a big-ass mistake. He knows it. And he wants to rectify it.
Courtney's world shattered in a single swipe. One moment, she was scrolling through her phone. The next, her heart dropped into her stomach. There it was, undeniable proof, messages, photos, the kind of receipts you wish you could unsee. Colt, the man she nursed through injury, the man her family welcomed into their home, had been cheating. Not a one-time slip, not a misunderstanding, but a full-blown, ongoing betrayal. The air in the room turned heavy, her hands shook, and the trust she'd built crumbled in seconds. She confronted him, voice trembling but clear, and Colt's face went pale. No excuses left, no way to spin it. The truth was out, and the fallout was instant. Courtney's parents, who had shown Colt nothing but kindness, watched as their daughter's heart broke right in front of them. The silence after the confrontation was louder than any argument. Colt packed his things, each item a reminder of what he'd thrown away, and left the house that had become his safe haven. He didn't go to a friend's place or try to fix things himself. Instead, he reached for his phone and dialed the one person who always picked up, no matter how bad things got, his mother, Debbie. Welcome to Reality Sport. I'm Oliva, and if you think you've seen drama before, buckle up. This is the kind of mess that makes you question everything you thought you knew about loyalty, family, and second chances. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and drop your hottest take in the comments. Do you think anyone deserves a second chance after a betrayal like this? Or is trust a one-way street with no U-turns? I want to hear your stories, your opinions, and your wildest predictions. Because what happens next is going to test every boundary you thought existed. Colt didn't just cheat, he detonated his relationship and then, instead of facing the consequences, he called in backup. Not a friend, not a therapist, but his own mother. Debbie, who lives hundreds of miles away, got the call and didn't hesitate. She packed her bags, grabbed her boyfriend Tony, and hit the road, determined to rescue her son from the mess he'd made. But here's where things get wild. Colt didn't ask for advice or a shoulder to cry on. He wanted Debbie to fix it for him. To go to Courtney, plead his case, and somehow convince her to forgive the unforgivable. Imagine being so deep in denial that you send your mom to clean up your relationship disaster. The stakes couldn't be higher. Courtney's trust is gone. Her family is furious, and Colt is hiding out in a motel, hoping his mom can work some kind of miracle. But what exactly did Colt do? Was it just messages? Or did it go further? How much does Debbie know? And how far is she willing to go to protect her son? Will Courtney even open the door? Or is this the end of the road for Colt and his endless second chances? The tension is thick. The emotions are raw, and every move from here on out could change everything. If you think this is as dramatic as it gets, you're in for a shock, because the real chaos is only just beginning. Keep watching, because the next move will leave you questioning who's really in control and who's about to lose everything. Debbie's car pulled up outside the faded motel, headlights slicing through the early morning gloom. She stepped out, clutching her purse like a lifeline, her face set in that familiar mix of worry and determination. Tony trailed behind, silent, letting Debbie take the lead. For years, Debbie had been Colt's safety net, the one person who never turned her back, no matter how many times he stumbled. Their bond was complicated, tangled up in years of shared history, old wounds, and a pattern that always seemed to repeat itself. Debbie had watched her son make mistake after mistake, and every time, she'd been there to pick up the pieces, patch things up, and hope, maybe this time, he'd finally learn. But as she walked into the cramped motel room, the reality hit her. Colt wasn't a lost teenager anymore. He was a grown man, sitting on the edge of a sagging bed, eyes red from a night of regret, or maybe just self-pity. Debbie's heart ached, but there was frustration simmering beneath the surface. She wanted to believe her son was better than this, that he could change, but the evidence was stacked against him. Still, old habits die hard. She sat beside him, wrapped him in a hug, and promised they'd get through this together. That's what she always did. Shielded him from the worst, softened the blows, and tried to fix what he'd broken. Debbie's enabling wasn't just about love. It was about fear, too. Fear of losing her son. Fear of being alone. Fear that if she didn't step in, no one else would. She'd spent years as the center of Colt's world, and now, with him spiraling, she felt that old urge to take control. But was she really helping him? Or just making it easier for him to avoid responsibility? Every time she smoothed things over, every time she made excuses, she was teaching Colt that someone would always be there to clean up his mess. Was she protecting him? Or was she protecting herself from the pain of letting go? As Debbie listened to Colt's version of events, her mind raced. She wanted to believe he was sorry, that this was a one-time slip, but deep down, she knew better. The pattern was too familiar. Still, she clung to hope, convinced that if she could just talk to Courtney, if she could explain how much Colt regretted his actions, maybe things could go back to the way they were. But what was her real agenda? Was she fighting for her son's happiness? Or for her own sense of purpose? Would she finally confront Colt about his behavior, or would she fall back into old habits and coddle him, no matter the cost? The questions hung in the air, unanswered, as Debbie steeled herself for the next step. She was about to walk into a storm, and this time, the outcome was anything but certain. The tension between loyalty and accountability was about to explode, and every word, every choice would push this family closer to a breaking point. If you think Debbie's about to play it safe, think again, because the next move could change everything, and not everyone is ready for the truth. Colt sat hunched on the edge of the motel bed, the cheap floral comforter bunched under his fists, staring at the wall as if it might offer him a way out. He replayed the confrontation in his mind, searching for a version where he didn't look like the villain, but every angle led back to the same ugly truth. He'd cheated. Again. And this time, there was no hiding, no clever spin, no technicality to cling to. Still, as Debbie listened, Colt started to build his case, brick by brick, the way he always did. He talked about feeling lonely, about the pressure of living with Courtney's family, about how things had changed after his injury. He said he felt misunderstood, isolated, like nobody saw how hard he was trying. He painted himself as the victim of circumstance, not the architect of his own disaster. But the words rang hollow, even to him. This wasn't the first time Colt had found himself in this position, and it probably wouldn't be the last. There was a pattern here, one that stretched back years. Relationships that started with hope and ended in heartbreak, always with Colt at the center, always with someone else left to pick up the pieces. He remembered the fallout with his ex-wife, the late-night arguments, the accusations, the promises to change that never stuck. Each time, he'd sworn it would be different, that he'd learned his lesson, but somehow, the same mistakes kept repeating. It was like watching a rerun of a show you know by heart. Except, this time, the consequences felt heavier, the pain sharper. Colt's confessions weren't just about what he'd done, they were about what he hadn't done. He hadn't taken real responsibility, hadn't faced the hard truths about himself. Instead, he leaned on emotional manipulation, hoping that if he looked sad enough, if he sounded lost enough, someone would swoop in and save him. Debbie always had. She'd been his shield, his advocate, the one person who never gave up on him, no matter how many times he let her down. But even as he leaned into her comfort, there was a flicker of doubt. Was this the time she'd finally say enough? Why do some people never change, even when the stakes are this high? Sometimes it's fear. Fear of being alone, fear of facing the truth, fear of losing the safety net that's always been there. Sometimes it's habit, the comfort of old patterns, even when they hurt. For Colt, it was easier to blame the situation, to point to stress or bad luck, than to admit he was the common denominator. Growth takes work, and Colt had always found a shortcut, a way to avoid the hard parts. But now, with Courtney gone and Debbie looking at him with a mix of love and disappointment, the shortcuts were running out. Would Colt finally step up and own his mistakes? Or would he keep searching for someone else to fix things for him? Was this the wake-up call he needed, or just another chapter in a story that never seems to end? The motel room felt smaller by the minute, the walls closing in as Colt realized that this time, the consequences might be more than even Debbie could handle. The next move was his, but for the first time, he wasn't sure what to do. And as the hours ticked by, the question hung in the air. Would he finally break the cycle, or was he already planning his next excuse? The answer was coming, and it would change everything for everyone involved. Debbie sat at the tiny motel table, her hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of coffee, eyes darting between Tony and her phone. She scrolled through old photos of Colt and Courtney, searching for some sign that things could go back to the way they were, but every image felt like a reminder of how much had changed. Tony watched her quietly, sensing the storm brewing beneath her calm exterior. Debbie was determined, maybe even desperate, to fix things for her son. She started outlining her plan, voice low, but urgent. They would go to Courtney's house, sit down with her and her parents, and try to explain. Debbie rehearsed what she'd say, how Colt was sorry, how he knew he'd made a huge mistake, how everyone deserves a second chance. She believed if she could just get Courtney to see how much Colt regretted his actions, maybe, just maybe, there was hope for forgiveness. But Tony wasn't so sure. He'd seen this pattern before, watched Debbie throw herself into Colt's problems, always hoping for a different outcome. He asked her if she was ready for Courtney to say no, if she was prepared for the possibility that this time things couldn't be fixed. Debbie hesitated, her confidence wavering for a moment. She didn't want to think about that. She needed to believe that love and effort could heal even the deepest wounds. She needed to believe that her son wasn't beyond redemption. So she pushed the doubts aside and focused on the plan. They would go together, present a united front, and do everything they could to convince Courtney to give Colt another chance. Meanwhile, across town, Courtney was trying to hold herself together. She hadn't slept much since the truth came out. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those messages, heard Colt's excuses echoing in her mind. Anger simmered just beneath the surface, but it was tangled up with confusion and exhaustion. She kept replaying the last few months, wondering where things had gone wrong, wondering if she'd missed the signs or ignored her instincts. Her parents hovered nearby, offering comfort but also struggling with their own feelings. They'd welcomed Colt into their home, treated him like family, and now they felt betrayed too. Their disappointment was sharp, but it was their protectiveness that stood out. They wanted to shield Courtney from more pain, to help her see that she deserved better, but they also knew she had to make her own decisions. Courtney's mom tried to keep things light, making tea and fussing over small details, but her eyes kept drifting to her daughter, searching for any sign that she was okay. Her dad was quieter, his anger simmering beneath a calm exterior. He'd always believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt, but Colt had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. He worried that Courtney's kindness would be her undoing, that she'd feel pressured to forgive when what she needed was space to heal. They talked quietly in the kitchen, debating whether to intervene or let Courtney handle things her own way. In the end, they agreed to support her no matter what she decided, but they made it clear they wouldn't let Colt hurt her again. As the day wore on, Courtney tried to prepare herself for whatever was coming. She knew Debbie wanted to meet, knew there would be tears and apologies and promises that things would be different. Part of her wanted to believe it, to trust that people could change, but another part of her was tired of being the one who always forgave, tired of carrying the weight of someone else's mistakes. She practiced what she'd say, rehearsed setting boundaries, telling herself she wouldn't back down this time. But doubt crept in. What if Debbie's words got through to her? What if she started to second-guess herself? The thought made her stomach twist. Debbie, for her part, was running through every possible scenario. She imagined Courtney slamming the door in her face, imagined her breaking down in tears, imagined her agreeing to try again. Each possibility felt equally real and equally terrifying. She wondered if she was doing the right thing, if she was helping, or just making things worse. But she couldn't stop herself. She loved her son, flaws and all, and she couldn't bear the thought of him facing this alone. She convinced herself that if she could just get everyone in the same room, if she could just speak from the heart, things might turn around. Tony tried to ground her, reminding her that Courtney had every right to be angry, that forgiveness couldn't be forced. He told her to be honest, to acknowledge Colt's mistakes without making excuses. Debbie nodded, but inside, she was already crafting her speech, already planning how to steer the conversation toward hope instead of blame. She wanted to believe that people could change, that love could conquer even the worst mistakes. But she also knew that sometimes, love meant letting go. As the sun set, both families braced themselves for the meeting. Courtney sat with her parents, drawing strength from their presence, reminding herself that she wasn't alone. Debbie and Tony drove across town, the car filled with nervous energy and unspoken fears. The confrontation was inevitable, and everyone knew it would be messy. Would Courtney stand firm, or would old habits pull her back into Colt's orbit? Would Debbie's plan work, or would it backfire, leaving everyone more hurt than before? The answers were coming, and nobody was sure they were ready for what came next. The tension was thick, the stakes higher than ever, and as the clock ticked down to the meeting, every heart in both houses beat a little faster, waiting for the moment that would decide everything. The doorbell rang, and the whole house seemed to freeze. Courtney's mom glanced at her, silently asking if she was ready. Courtney nodded, but her hands were clenched tight in her lap. Her dad opened the door, and Debbie stepped inside, Tony close behind, both of them carrying the weight of Colt's mistakes on their shoulders. Debbie's eyes were already glassy, her voice trembling as she greeted everyone, trying to sound hopeful, but unable to hide the nerves. The living room felt smaller than usual, the air thick with tension and unspoken questions. Courtney's parents sat on either side of her, a silent wall of support, while Debbie and Tony took the couch across from them. For a moment, nobody spoke. The silence was heavy, broken only by the sound of Debbie pulling tissues from her purse. Debbie started with an apology, her words tumbling out in a rush. She said Colt knew he'd made a huge mistake, that he was devastated, that he wanted nothing more than to make things right. She talked about how hard things had been for Colt, how much he missed Courtney, how sorry he was for hurting her. Tears slid down her cheeks as she begged Courtney to consider giving him another chance. Tony chimed in, his voice steady but gentle, saying everyone makes mistakes, and sometimes people need a little help to find their way back. Debbie's pleas grew more emotional, her voice cracking as she described how much Colt loved Courtney, how much he regretted what he'd done, how he was lost without her. Courtney listened, her face calm but her eyes hard. She let Debbie finish, then took a deep breath. She said she appreciated the apology, but trust wasn't something you could glue back together after it had been shattered. She explained how much it hurt to find out about Colt's cheating, how it wasn't the first time she'd been betrayed in a relationship, and how she refused to be someone's second choice or backup plan. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook as she spoke. She said she needed to protect herself, that she couldn't keep forgiving someone who kept making the same mistakes. Her parents nodded, their support clear, but they let Courtney speak for herself. Debbie's tears flowed faster. She said she understood, but she begged Courtney to remember the good times, to think about all the memories they'd made, to believe that people could change. She promised that Colt was different now, that he'd learned his lesson, that he was willing to do whatever it took to earn back Courtney's trust. The pressure in the room built with every word, the guilt thick enough to choke on. Courtney's mom reached over and squeezed her hand, a silent reminder that she didn't have to carry this alone. Courtney's dad spoke up, his voice calm but firm. He said he'd seen this pattern before, that forgiveness was a gift, not an obligation, and that sometimes the kindest thing you could do was walk away. The conversation turned, the emotions in the room swirling between hope and heartbreak. Debbie pleaded, her voice raw, asking what it would take for Courtney to give Colt another chance. Courtney shook her head, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. She said she couldn't do it, that she'd spent too long trying to fix someone who didn't want to fix himself. She said she deserved better, that she was done being the one who always forgave, always gave, more than she got. Debbie's face crumpled, the reality settling in. Tony put a hand on her shoulder, trying to comfort her, but the pain was obvious. The question hung in the air. Was forgiveness possible? Or was it just enabling someone to keep hurting you? Courtney's answer was clear. She said she hoped Colt would get the help he needed, that she wished him well, but she couldn't be the one to save him. She said she was choosing herself this time, choosing to break the cycle instead of repeating it. Her parents looked at her with pride, their disappointment in Colt overshadowed by their relief that Courtney was standing her ground. Debbie wiped her eyes, her voice barely above a whisper. She said she understood, but it was clear she was struggling to accept it. She asked if there was anything she could do, any way to make things right. But Courtney shook her head. The answer was no. The meeting ended with hugs and quiet goodbyes, the air heavy with sadness and finality. Debbie and Tony left, their shoulders slumped, the hope they'd carried in with them replaced by the weight of reality. As the door closed behind them, Courtney let out a shaky breath. She felt lighter, but also raw, the pain of the confrontation still fresh. Her parents hugged her, telling her how proud they were, reminding her that she deserved love that didn't come with conditions or apologies. The question lingered. Would Debbie accept defeat, or would she keep trying to fix what couldn't be fixed? Would Courtney's resolve hold, or would the pressure to forgive wear her down over time? The answers weren't clear, but one thing was certain: the cycle had been broken. At least for now, and everyone would have to find a new way forward. The fallout from this showdown would echo for a long time, and nobody could predict what would happen next. Courtney sat alone in her room after the meeting, the echoes of Debbie's pleas and her parents' quiet support still swirling in her mind. She stared at the ceiling, replaying every word, every tear, every moment when she almost caved. Her heart was heavy, but her mind was sharper than it had been in weeks. She thought back to the first time she'd been betrayed, years before Colt, when she'd convinced herself that forgiveness was strength, that giving someone another chance was the right thing to do. She remembered the late-night apologies, the promises that things would be different, the way she'd swallowed her own pain to keep the peace. Each memory was a bruise that never fully faded, a lesson she'd tried to learn but kept forgetting. Now with Colt, the pattern was impossible to ignore. She saw it clearly, how she'd always been the one to bend, to forgive, to hope for change that never came. The weight of all those second chances pressed down on her, but this time something was different. She felt the exhaustion in her bones, the kind that comes from carrying someone else's mistakes for too long. She realized she was done being the one who always fixed things, who always put herself last. The decision wasn't easy, but it was necessary. She picked up her phone, hands steady for the first time in days, and typed out a message to Colt. She told him she wished him well, that she hoped he would find the help he needed, but she couldn't be part of his story anymore. She said goodbye, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. She hit send and felt a strange sense of relief, like she'd finally stepped out of a storm and into the sun. Down the hall, Debbie sat with Tony, her face streaked with tears. She read Courtney's message, her mind racing through every stage of grief. First came denial. She told Tony there had to be a way to fix this, that Courtney just needed more time. Then came bargaining. She wondered if another apology, another promise might change Courtney's mind. But as the minutes passed, reality settled in. Debbie's shoulders slumped, her voice quiet as she admitted that maybe, for once, she couldn't fix things for Colt. She felt lost, unsure of her role now that her son's safety net had finally snapped. The house was quiet, but the air was charged with a new kind of energy. Courtney's parents hugged her, proud of her strength, but worried about what would come next. Would Colt accept her decision? Or would he try to pull her back in? Would Debbie finally let go? Or would she keep fighting for a second chance that wasn't hers to give? The answers hung in the air, unresolved, as everyone tried to adjust to the new reality. Courtney lay in bed that night, feeling the ache of loss, but also the spark of something new. Hope, not for the relationship, but for herself. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, that there would be moments of doubt and loneliness, but she also knew she'd made the right choice. The cycle was broken, and for the first time in a long time, she felt free. The question now was what Colt would do with his own freedom, and whether Debbie would finally learn to let go. The story wasn't over, not by a long shot, and the next chapter was about to begin. Colt stared at the ceiling of his motel room, the silence pressing in on him from all sides. The world outside moved on, but inside, time felt frozen. He scrolled through old photos of Courtney, her smile now a reminder of everything he'd lost. The phone was quiet, no messages from Debbie, no desperate calls from Courtney. For the first time, he was alone with the consequences of his choices. The excuses he'd leaned on for so long sounded hollow now, echoing back at him with nothing to soften the blow. He wondered if this was what rock bottom felt like, or if there was still further to fall. The realization stung. He'd always counted on someone to catch him. But this time, there was no one left to call. Debbie sat at her kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold. She replayed the confrontation in her mind, searching for a moment where she could have said something different, done something more. The urge to fix things for Colt was still there, but it was tangled up with disappointment. Disappointment in him, in herself, in the way things had turned out. She'd always believed that love meant never giving up, but now she wondered if letting go was the braver choice. Tony tried to comfort her, reminding her that sometimes the best way to help someone grow is to step back and let them face their own mistakes. Debbie nodded, but the lesson was a hard one to swallow. Across town, Courtney woke up to sunlight streaming through her window, the weight in her chest a little lighter than before. She moved through her morning routine with a sense of calm she hadn't felt in months. There were moments when doubt crept in, flashes of guilt, memories of happier times, but they faded quickly, replaced by a quiet pride. She'd stood her ground, broken the cycle, and chosen herself for once. Her parents noticed the change. The way she carried herself with more confidence, the way her laughter came a little easier. They knew the road ahead wouldn't be perfect, but they also knew Courtney was stronger than she'd ever been. The lessons from this mess ran deep. Courtney learned that self-worth isn't measured by how much pain you can endure for someone else. She realized that forgiveness is powerful, but it loses its meaning when it's given too freely. Debbie faced the truth that loving someone doesn't mean shielding them from every consequence, and that sometimes the hardest thing is to let go. Colt, left with his own thoughts, was forced to confront the reality that change doesn't come from apologies or promises. It comes from doing the work, alone, when no one else is watching. Looking back, it was clear that everyone had been stuck in their own patterns, repeating the same mistakes and hoping for a different outcome. The seeds of change had been planted long ago, but it took heartbreak and hard choices to make them grow. Did anyone truly change? The answer was complicated. Courtney had, in ways that mattered most. Debbie was learning, slowly, to step back. Colt's journey was just beginning, and whether he would break his own cycle was a question only time could answer. The fallout from this story wasn't just about loss, it was about growth, about finding the courage to choose a different path, even when it hurts. The echoes of these choices would linger, shaping what came next for everyone involved. And as the dust settled, one thing was certain. The story wasn't finished, and the next twist was already waiting in the wings. Courtney was finally starting to feel like herself again. She'd spent the last few days reclaiming her space, filling her apartment with fresh flowers, and letting the quiet be a comfort instead of a reminder of what she'd lost. Her phone buzzed with supportive messages from friends, and her parents checked in every evening. their voices warm and proud. She was healing, slowly but surely, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like her life was her own. She even caught herself smiling at small things, a favorite song on the radio, the smell of coffee in the morning, the way the sunlight danced across her kitchen table. The storm had passed, and she was still standing. But peace never lasts long in this world. One evening, as Courtney was settling in with a book, her phone lit up with a notification that made her heart skip. It wasn't Colt, and it wasn't Debbie. It was a message from someone she hadn't spoken to in years, a name she'd almost forgotten, but not quite. The message was short, almost casual, but the timing was anything but. "Hey, Courtney. I heard about what happened. If you ever want to talk, I'm here." It was her ex, the one who'd broken her heart before Colt ever entered the picture. The one who taught her the first hard lesson about trust. She stared at the screen, 1,000 memories rushing back, and wondered if this was fate testing her resolve or just another twist in a story that refused to end. Meanwhile, across town, Colt was still stuck in his motel room, the walls closing in a little more each day. He'd tried reaching out to Courtney, but she hadn't responded. He'd tried calling Debbie, but the conversations were short, awkward, and left him feeling more alone than ever. He scrolled through social media, watching other people move on with their lives, and wondered if he'd ever get another chance. Then, late one night, his phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number. "Colt, I saw what happened on TV. If you want to talk, I've been there." It was a former cast member from the show, someone who'd been through their own public breakup, someone who knew what it was like to have your worst moments broadcast for the world to see. Colt hesitated, thumb hovering over the reply button, unsure if he was ready to face the truth or if he was just looking for another distraction. Debbie, for her part, was trying to find her footing in a world where she wasn't the fixer anymore. She spent her days volunteering at a local animal shelter, her evenings with Tony, and her nights replaying old memories of Colt as a little boy before things got so complicated. She wanted to reach out to Courtney, to apologize again, but she knew it wouldn't change anything. She wondered if she'd done the right thing, if she'd protected Colt too much, or not enough. Then, one afternoon, she got a letter in the mail. An actual letter, not a text or an email. It was from her own mother, who she hadn't spoken to in years. The letter was full of stories about forgiveness, about letting go, about the ways families hurt and heal each other. Debbie read it twice, tears streaming down her face, and realized that maybe it was time to start healing herself too. Courtney sat with her phone in her hand, staring at the message from her ex. She thought about everything she'd been through, all the ways she'd grown, and all the mistakes she never wanted to repeat. She typed out a reply, paused, then deleted it. She wasn't ready to open that door again, not yet. Instead, she called her best friend, told her about the message, and laughed for the first time in weeks. She realized that closure didn't come from someone else's apology or a second chance. It came from choosing herself, every single day. Colt finally replied to the former cast member, agreeing to meet for coffee. He didn't know what he was looking for: advice, sympathy, maybe just someone who understood. As he left the motel for the first time in days, he felt a flicker of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, he could start to change. But old habits die hard, and the road ahead was anything but certain. Debbie wrote back to her mother, pouring out her regrets and her hopes for the future. She promised to try to let go, to let Colt find his own way, and to focus on her own happiness for once. It wasn't easy, but it was a start. As the sun set on another day, each of them stood at a crossroads. Courtney, stronger and wiser, ready to move forward on her own terms. Colt, facing the long road of self-reflection and real change. Debbie, learning that love sometimes means stepping back, not stepping in. The story wasn't over. If anything, it was just getting started. And if you think this was the last twist, you haven't seen anything yet. Because next time, we're diving into the fallout from Colt's coffee meeting, the secrets that come out when exes reconnect, and the unexpected ways families find their way back to each other, or fall apart for good. You won't want to miss what happens when old wounds meet new beginnings, and the past refuses to stay buried. Stick around, because the next chapter is about to turn everything upside down.